Hello and welcome to another Overlord lore video, and today we are going to take a closer look at the question why Ainz Ooal Gown and other players have arrived at different times and different places in the new world, which, given how time normally works, is rather odd. But before we're going to take a closer look at all of this, let me thank my Patreons for supporting this channel, as well as all users of the YouTube thanks function for making one-time donations. Also please check out my video about witch cults. The video will be linked down in the video description. Now, with all of that said, I personally believe that Platinum Dragonlord's supposed father, the Dragon Emperor, as well as possibly way more ancient Dragonlords, were ultimately culpable for this distortion. But in order to understand where I'm getting at, it's best to explain why, at least in my opinion, in my own theory, players arrived in the new world in the first place. And I believe the Dragonlords are responsible because a spell they casted partially misfired. But again, in order to understand why the spell misfired, or why I believe there has to be a spell in the first place, we have to dive into the world of Overlord. Or should I say, worlds? Because back in our world, the real world, in the year of 2138, magic did not exist, but technology. Despite all of the horrors that people faced in the future, like toxic air and pollution so severe that the earth became completely barren to any crop, plant, and possibly even to microbic life, the technology still had progressed to the point where digital media could be experienced with most senses. In so-called dive MMORPGs, player would dive into the virtual world to the point that the graphic was photorealistic. And not only that, but since their own brain had been connected to the virtual world, the brain signals for jumping and running would be translated one-to-one into the digital world, into the digital space, into Ainz Ooal Online, into the video game itself. So if you wanted to run, you just would run. If you wanted to jump, then you would jump in the digital world instead of in the real one, because all of the nerve signals had been intercepted. Also, there was a sensation of touch. Of course, any loot touching would result in a permaban, but touching your weapons, your gear, hitting your opponents with your fists, getting hit, or touching grass, a purely virtual experience at this point would all result in haptic feedback, though no pain was involved in all of this. And Ainz Ooal Online was a pristine world, albeit a purely digital one. And now we jump into the second real world besides our own, known simply as the New World. And in the New World, magic was a thing, and quite a great one actually. In the New World, the laws of physics worked differently. It was a parallel dimension, similar to our own understanding of a fantasy world. But, and this is another point, the world wasn't a fantasy world because humans had created it. It simply just existed, independent of humanity and human imagination. And here's the point where the Dragonlords and the Dragon Emperor come into play. They are magical, they are quite powerful, and presumably quite greedy. And they presumably had the ability to peer into other dimensions, and by pure chance, the Dragonlords stumbled upon two, from their point of view, very different worlds. One was a desolate wasteland, where fleeting creatures lived on a toxic planet in tiny apartment buildings. And imagine how weird this world would look to a magical dragon. People would sit all day in their homes until they slept. Then they would wake up and travel to a different place, through fumes, oily rain, and toxic air, just to arrive at a different place where they would sit around and look at something. And most people would wear these strange helmets over their heads and eyes. Clearly, this must have been some weird world. Perhaps the dragon even thought of these humans with their VR headsets also as weirdly magical, because they of course had no understanding of our technology or what VR even is. So they might have become quite curious at what these squires, these seers, these humans would look at. And perhaps they even have casted a spell to control one single human playing something, or from their point studying another dimension, because then they would see Yggdrasil, a world way more familiar to them than the toxic world Earth had become. And not only would they see Yggdrasil online, but they had no idea that this was a video game, or what video games even were. Just like the Dragonlords misinterpreted our technology as magic, and our screens and VR headsets as a form of magic, the Dragonlords saw Yggdrasil online and viewed it as just another parallel dimension in which people summoned avatars into. And once they presumably learned about the world items, the 200 most rare objects everybody in the 9 worlds of Yggdrasil had been obsessed with, perhaps the Dragonlords felt their draconic avarice rising. They wanted the items that 9 worlds were fighting over just for themselves. They craved the power to change the world in their favor. They wanted to own these legendary objects, so they devised a grand ritual under the leadership of the Dragon Emperor, presumably Platinum's father. They would summon these items into the new world with their own magic, the magic of their soul, the wild magic, the original native magic of the world, and in order to do so, they all, or at least a sizable chunk of the dragons, came together in order to summon these items to their own dimension. Perhaps they have even waited until the world of Yggdrasil was dying, or from our, or Ainz Ooal Gown's own perspective, when the servers would have been shut down. And this might have been a cautious move, because they saw the power of the world enemies, and of the world items, as well as of the many players, and therefore perhaps they had concluded that the world was quite dangerous indeed, and that it would be best to steal the world-class items the moment the world was unmade. Therefore the spell had to be timed properly to hit at the exact second the worlds of Yggdrasil would have been gone. So in other words, timing in general, and perhaps time magic in particular, were also involved, if not vital, in all of this. But timing was not the only thing involved, aside from an enormous amount of magic that needed to be mobilized. In order to get what they wanted, the Dragonlords needed to target items the size of an eyeball, at least from their own perspective, so they probably had to widen their spells to a few hundred meters around the world items, just to be sure to actually get them. After all, the dimension was, from their own perspective, dying, so they won't get a second try, and any world item not summoned would be lost forever. So they had to make sure that the spell was sufficiently powerful to summon all of the world items, as well as the areas surrounding it. And if everything would have gone according to plan, then the world items would appear before the Dragon Emperor himself. A brilliant plan with one fatal weakness. Yggdrasil Online wasn't another plane of existence. It wasn't a world, but merely a non-magical illusion, in order to escape the real, poisonous world of the 22nd century for a few precious hours. And therefore, the only magic involved would have been the carefully calibrated wild magic of the Dragonlords, that were powerful enough to breach the veil between the 2 dimensions and transport the world items back to their own dimension, to the new world. And it partially malfunctioned. Instead of transporting the magical objects known as world-class items, each supposedly a self-contained world, these purely digital items were made to exist in the first place by literally being formed out of concentrated wild magic. This would explain why Dragonlords call the world items wild magic, and why world items are able to actually cancel out their own wild magic, despite wild magic never existing in the first place in Yggdrasil. And now that the spell partially misfired, the energy original meant for the timely transportation of the world-class items to the Dragon Emperor would be spent on making the world items in the first place. And also bringing to life everything that was around them, the soil, the trees, the rocks, the air, and of course items, guild bases, and players. Now with so much of the wild magic spent, what was left barely was enough to transport everything back into the new world. And with the magic so stretched, the summoning wasn't instantaneously, nor was the place of the summoning where the Dragonlords wanted it to be. Instead, the world items would appear somewhere in the new world, alongside with everything and everyone around them at this time. This included the players' avatars, and presumably their souls, their consciousness, their very self. For all of this was also linked to Yggdrasil Online. Even worse, since the magic system of Yggdrasil was not only a different one, but also purely digital, the new world's own wild magic system had to operate tier magic from its very own energy, similar to a computer that had to run a contained, virtual version of Windows on a Linux system. The world's magic not only had to simulate tier magic, but also the environment it would work in, meaning that what is left of the available processing power of the computer, or what was left of the available wild magic, wasn't nearly enough for the Dragonlords to send the items back and restore their wild magic, which had become twisted and deformed. And by the way, I'm using their own words here, not mine. So the reason, at least in my opinion, why players only appeared every 100 years, and why Ainz Ooal Gown appeared in two different locations, centuries apart, in the light and in the bonus novel, is the lack of wild magic. There's no energy left for a proper place or a proper time. Instead, the energy was only enough to complete the main objective, to transport these objects into the new world. And this was all the summoning spell at this point could do. And even then it will take a century now, instead of a second. And furthermore, I believe that the reason for why Sheltier and basically all other NPCs have memories of their time in Yggdrasil Online is that the spell had a time-based magical component in it, which the original purpose was to transport world items at the last possible second of Yggdrasil Online's existence. But this component of the spell also in part misfired, simply because Yggdrasil was not a real world, but just a digital game. Hence why the time component of the spell stretched into the past, and therefore being unable to deliver the world items in a timely manner, because again, some amount of wild magic had been siphoned off or overspilled in order to awaken the originally lifeless NPCs back in Yggdrasil at the second the servers were shut down. At least this is my explanation for why players are now arriving at different times and in different places in the new world, or rather, why they are arriving in a parallel dimension as their avatars in the first place. I know this video was very much theoretical in nature, but given all of the hints and facts we have about the Dragonlords and the world items, I think that this is the most plausible theory for why players end up in the new world, in this confusing and messy way. And now it's your turn. What do you think about my theory? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Please let me know your thoughts down in the comment section. And with that said, I say thank you very much for watching, and special thanks to Arder Daddy Arder, Bad Guy Ye, Bad Boito 316, Beezer, Ben C, Brandon D, Chrissy, Crowley 0221, Sia, Crystal Prime, Dad Slime, Death is Mercy, Deathless Dragonlord, Demon Xenomorph 1987, Devin Downen, Ding Dong, Duckwagon, Dunkler Krieger, Dystopia, Dystopia II, Enigmatic Unicorn, Phil Ralchivan, Guy with That Head, Hector Marino, Hoss, Huster, Jacob G, Jana B, Jason, J. Morris, Chromius, Kyle R, Lee K. Long, Legendarius, Lelouch Britannia with a Mustache, Lexus Fox, Lord Nishikian Rai, Lord Touch Me, Love Razor, Merovec, Mr. Shoes, Mr. Tweaker, Michael R, Michael Y, Nope, Oh Hell No, Normal Toad, Oh Kill, Overlord General Gasper, Paddy Pantom, Personage, Primus 11, Rhinomere, Cune Kerkos P, Shergox's Daddy, Shadow Lightning Wolf, Shrine Keeper, Super Tier Magic Batista Bomb, Supreme Cheese, Staris, Ted, Texas Deer, The Orc Warboss, Rock Ed Smasher, T.E. Wang, Vash Hawkeye, Vegito 27, Venture Fanatic, Wilhelm, Xenokai, and Zonagon. Thanks guys. Anyway, have a nice day, and I hope to see you again under my next video.